Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to dive into today's topic with you all. We're looking at a truly mind-bending question, one that economists, technologists, and philosophers are urgently debating right this second. The question is, how is society actually going to function when artificial intelligence potentially replaces all human labor? Today, we are exploring the absolute edge of the economic frontier. We're talking about the transition from a world of scarcity to one of AI-driven abundance, and exploring this massive concept of universal high income. Okay, let's dive into this. Elon Musk recently threw out this absolutely staggering vision, predicting that the long-term outcome of our future will be an unimaginable abundance, where you can basically have whatever you want. And look, this isn't just science fiction anymore. This is an economic trajectory being actively mapped out by pioneers like Musk and Sam Altman. They're predicting an era where AI and advanced robotics drive the cost of labor and, by extension, the cost of living down toward zero, pulling us into a state of sustainable abundance.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to get our definition straight. You've probably heard of UBI, Universal Basic Income. Well, UBI provides a bare minimum survival floor. It's essentially poverty management. But Universal High Income, or UHI, is fundamentally different. UHI underwrites broad discretionary consumption. It's about affording upper middle-class security without the need to work. So we're not talking about managing poverty here. We're talking about how to distribute a massive, unprecedented technological surplus.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. The AI automation cliff. 2. The economics of abundance. 3. Architecting universal high income. 4. Inflation and the supply trap. And finally, 5. The post-work society.
All right, part 1. The AI automation cliff.
And this brilliantly illustrates something systems thinker David Shapiro calls the automation paradox. Think about classical unemployment for a second. A worker loses their job, the company's output falls, and the government's tax base shrinks, right? It's a net negative for everyone involved. But AI-driven unemployment is completely different. A worker gets replaced by a digital twin that works faster, cheaper, and 24/7. So the company's output actually skyrockets, and the taxable wealth of the whole economy expands. The resources to take care of everyone absolutely exist. They just need to be captured and redistributed. And look, this isn't just some far-off sci-fi prediction. The ground is already shifting right under our feet. Labor's share of national income has already dropped a full 10 percentage points over the last 5 decades. That means productivity has entirely decoupled from your wages. This stark reality kind of proves that structurally, wage labor as our sole engine for household income is dying. We simply have to build a new model to traverse this dangerous period, the automation cliff, between the collapse of wages and the maturity of new, capital-based income systems. Which brings us to part 2, the economics of abundance. So how do we actually pull this off? David Shapiro lays out the required building blocks for this monumental pivot. Since we can't just rely on taxing labor anymore, we have to pivot to generating household income through capital. Step 1 is establishing the transfer floor. For example, reports from the Royal Society of Arts suggest creating a universal basic opportunity fund as a stepping stone to scale up existing safety nets like Social Security. Step 2 is public capital, meaning we establish massive sovereign wealth funds that pay direct dividends to citizens. And step 3 is universal basic capital. Think of things like issuing baby bonds to guarantee automated wealth building for every single citizen right from birth. Moving right along to part 3, architecting universal high income. To really wrap our heads around how the fiscal architecture works, we can look at the Israeli calibrated mosaic model, which was highlighted by Metatrends. What this mathematical model actually proves is that a transition to artificial general intelligence generates a capital windfall that far exceeds the cost of a universal high income. The surplus is there, for sure. The real challenge is entirely about designing the fiscal system required to capture it. Now, what's really interesting about this framework is the dynamic VAT. Imagine AI making goods incredibly cheap to produce. It drives the baseline cost of products way down. The dynamic VAT automatically adjusts upward to capture that deflation dividend. And the brilliance here? You and I pay the exact same price at the register. It invisibly funds the public without causing inflation for everyday buyers. When you combine that with profit ring fencing, which strategically captures only those above-trend windfall corporate profits, this engine could potentially fund a family of 4 to the 5th income decile, all without ever raising normal statutory tax rates. And the math behind this is fascinating. By using a negative income tax benefit schedule, we essentially create a poverty-ending floor. And because it specifically targets the surplus generated by AI, it leaves pre-automation corporate returns completely untouched.
meaning it doesn't stifle normal economic growth, but it still secures this incredible, robust safety net for all citizens.
But hey, I want to emphasize, this isn't just a bunch of abstract theories cooked up in a lab. We have real-world precedents and concrete proposals right now. Sam Altman has proposed the American Equity Fund, taxing corporate market value and private land at 2.5% annually to distribute ownership directly to citizens. And historically, as detailed by the Urban Institute, we have the Alaska Permanent Fund. They've literally distributed universal dividends from shared oil resources for decades, reducing poverty by 20 to 40% without hurting employment. So distributing royalties from a shared resource, it absolutely works in practice. That leads us to a crucial reality check in Part 4. Inflation and the supply trap. The Tax Project Institute forces us to pause and ask a very direct question. If literally everyone has a high income, what happens to prices? Remember, income is fundamentally just a claim on output. Having way more nominal income in your bank account doesn't automatically mean you have more real purchasing power if the cost of everything skyrockets at the same time. Because the math required to pull off a true UHI is frankly staggering. To put it into perspective, to fund a high income at the 80th percentile, assuming we capture 10% of economic gains for this fund, we would need a mind-blowing $70 trillion in total GDP growth. The sheer scale of the superabundance required is massive. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. And here is the core warning. UHI might solve the money problem, but giving everyone money doesn't magically create more physical stuff. Desirable real estate in a cool city, specialized healthcare, seats at top universities, raw materials, these have hard physical limits. If UHI payments spike demand but physical supply doesn't increase, the result is massive inflation. In fact, if you look at discussions on Reddit's Futurology board, there's a huge public fear about this. People are terrified that without strict regulation, corporations will just hike prices on rent and basic necessities, completely eating up those UHI payments. The Tax Project Institute warns that UHI could act as a massive price amplifier for these scarce resources. And beyond economics, there's a very intense public debate happening around power dynamics. As a critique published by Metatrends puts it, quote, "If you control the UHI, you have created a total control grid. You are building the company store that pays the serfs in scrip." There is a genuine, heavily debated concern that a government-controlled programmable UHI tied to digital IDs could result in unprecedented authoritarian control. Critics are arguing that the AI dividend should belong to the people in the form of nearly zero-cost living, and that confiscating that value just to pay us an allowance actually restricts true freedom. Finally, we arrive at Part 5, the post-work society. Let's zoom out and look at the timeline, because seeing how this builds is super important. Elon Musk himself has warned that the next 3 to 7 years are going to be, well, bumpy. We're likely going to see extreme technological prosperity and massive social instability happening at the exact same time. Now, long-term, baseline costs for goods might revert to just the raw cost of materials plus the electricity to make them, creating true sustainable abundance. But getting there, it's going to heavily test the very fabric of our society as we navigate that automation cliff. So I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought raised by researchers at Opus over at UTS. In a post-labor world, if your basic needs are entirely met and labor is completely optional, how will humanity find meaning and purpose? When traditional work vanishes, how are you going to define your identity? It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll see you in the next Explainer.